We are gathered here to reflect on the progress of our continent that has made in realizing the founding vision of this institution, the Africa Development Bank. Formed in the first decade following the independence of most African countries, the Africa Development Bank embodies the Pan-African ideology of sovereignty, prosperity, and unity. As a matter of fact, one of the founding communiques of this institution clearly declares the determination of African nations to use all our resources to lead all African countries to independence and achieve the development and prosperity of the continent in unity. That was done 60 years ago. And over 6 decades, the group, like the continent, has not only survived many crises and challenges, but has also grown stronger and achieved much in supporting economic growth and stability in our continent. It has become Africa's premier development financing institution. To date, it has financed 5,432 projects across our land, 4,036 of them which have been completed, provided a mechanism to coordinate the fight against poverty, improve the standards of African financial institutions and other institutions, and contributed significantly to conflict prevention and resolution. You agree with me, ladies and gentlemen, that Africa Development's performance has been nothing short of sterling. I think they deserve a better round of applause. Climate change is a threat multiplier. Its direct impact and related responses negatively affect our fiscal position through reduced revenues and increased public spending. The frequency of extreme weather events continuously diminish the resources available for public investment and provision of critical public goods such as health, education, and other social services. In particular, climate change has often resulted in substantial reallocation of resources towards mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. This is why Africa advocates for a financial architecture that integrates the issues on climate change and public finance at the center. I am proud of African heads of state who have not hesitated to make their voices heard in various fora, including through the Africa Leaders Nairobi Declaration on Climate Change and Call to Action that we held here in Nairobi. Climate change and sovereign debt are now firmly integrated, trapping governments in a vicious cycle where increasing losses and damage from climate impacts leads to rising costs of mobilizing resources for public investment. With such high financing costs and constrained government budgets, developing countries continue to struggle investing in low carbon and climate resilient development. At risk, therefore, are both climate action and our sustainable development goals. A better, more responsive, and fairer international financial architecture is urgently needed, and time here is of the essence. The financial architecture we advocate for as Africa today should integrate the continent's most challenging development issues of debt sustainability and climate vulnerability to enable development goals, SDGs, and Agenda 2063 commitments to be achieved. I am encouraged by Africa Development Bank's vision for the continent, underpinned by the high fives strategies and the objectives of the newly adopted 2024-2033 10-year strategy, which provide important foundations for this critical continental objectives. We have been clear and consistent in our advocacy. Africa is neither seeking handouts nor asking for charity. We are a continent of sovereign people who aspire to grow in a just multilateral system and access development financing on fair terms. Ladies and gentlemen, that is not too much to ask. We were clear at the Africa Climate Summit last year when we called for reforms of the international financial institutions and a range of new global taxes to fund climate action. We were clear at COP28 in Dubai last December when we once again emphasized the urgent need to mobilize investment for climate transition in developing countries from public and private sources globally. We also agreed to support the creation of markets that can mobilize resources at scale and called for the reform of the international financial architecture. Today, we assert that transforming the international financial architecture is an imperative that will give Africa a fair chance to turn its immense potential into opportunities to overcome multiple challenges and develop inclusively and sustainably. I take this opportunity to reiterate my call at the recent concluded IDA 21 summit here in Nairobi, that we appeal for a substantial 17th replenishment of the Africa Development Fund by at least US $25 billion to increase its capacity to continue providing concessional financing to the least developed African countries. We therefore call on our donors and development partners to scale up their investment in our continent's premier development financial institution, the Africa Development Bank. To further strengthen the capacity of our multilateral development institutions, we strongly support the proposal to rechannel special drawing rights through the Africa Development Bank as endorsed by the Africa Union's Assembly of Heads of State and Government. The pace of African economic growth and development has not kept pace with the rest of the world. More concerning is that the pace of African development remains far behind its undeniable potential. Intra-African trade remains low, with its share of global GDP less than 3%. Africa's share of global trade is also low, at just about 2%, and our exports are primarily unprocessed produce and raw materials. Not surprisingly, the rates of poverty and unemployment are still high on our continent. The vulnerabilities arising from this situation undoubtedly contribute significantly to conflict, economic refugees, and in this age of frequent extreme climate shocks, climate refugees. There is tremendous urgency in developing and implementing transformative interventions to turn things around for our continent, our countries, and our people. I am confident that this sense of urgency resonates very strongly amongst African leaders, and I am encouraged that we are not just doing something about it. We are actually making very good progress. Our continent is growing at the world's fastest rate, exceeding the global average of 3%, and 11 of the world's fastest growing economies in 2023 were African countries. We were told that by Adesina. Between 2000 and 2002, Africa's real GDP increased at an annual rate of 4.3%, well above the global average of 2.9%. 7 of the 10 world's fastest growing economies were in this continent of Africa. The Pan-African Economic Integration Agenda has finally taken off. Our regional economic blocs are vibrant and effective, while the African Continental Free Trade Area has come into effect and already made a huge impact. Although much remains to be accomplished before intra-Africa trade is smooth across borders, the data indicates strong positive movement following the launch of the Guided Trading Initiative. What we are saying is we need a financial architecture that has the following characteristics. Number one, long-term financing. 40 years, grace period, 10 years, or something in that order. Number two, low interest rates, concessional financing, including, where possible, grants. Number three, we also need financing at scale. The quantum is very important. And then number four, we also need financing that is agile, that is flexible, especially that responds, that is climate sensitive, so that if there are shocks, that financial architecture must be responsive, because climate change is the new normal. Switching from drought to floods progressively is becoming what it is. In Kenya, we had drought a year ago that decimated 2.5 million heads of livestock. This year, we're in floods that has taken the lives of 200 Kenyans. So this is the new reality. So the financial architecture that must be in place must respond to this climate reality that we have. And finally, is to be sensitive to sustainability. So our priority is to sort out the financial architecture, that's number one. Number two, our priority is to make sure that this continent, with its tremendous potential, we move it from potential to opportunity, from opportunity to investment. And finally, as I have said, even as we try to do something outside, we must also do something inside. That is why we are also looking at our own systems, our own governance, our own instruments. And that's why we are discussing, even internally, reform of the Africa Union, so that we are aligned as we reform the international financial architecture, as we reform the investment space to create opportunity for our assets. We must also reform our own institutions so that we align them and repurpose them to be in line with our aspirations and the outcomes we are looking for.